Okay, well, welcome everyone. This career event, Alumni Connect, we had an event very similar to this planned last year, and we were really looking forward to it. It was planned for Friday, and Wednesday, 2 days before this event, is when we declared our moving to remote status. And so we didn't have the event. And so we're going to try it maybe a little differently than what was originally planned. But we hope that the information that our alumni panelists share with you students, we hope that that's informative. So what I'm going to do to start us off is just let the panelists introduce themselves. I did want everyone to know that we are recording this, and so just to be clear on that. Obviously, if you don't like your face here, you can blank the screen. We won't hold it against you. The other thing I'll just mention is as we go along, if you do have questions, I'm going to ask that you type those in the chat, just because I'm not sure that I'm not sure interrupting is probably the best way to do it, but I will try to keep track of the chat and then ask questions at the appropriate time. So let's go very quickly around, and we'll hear from the panelists as they introduce themselves. Beth, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm Beth Gamble. I'm a graduate from the class of 1987. I am a senior systems analyst at the Smithsonian Institution, Natural Museum of Natural History. I work in the IT office. I am not I have been on hiring panels. I have never been a hiring manager, but I have been on panels and certainly have contributed to that process. After graduating, I'm originally from New York. I did want to stay in Virginia, but I didn't have a job right out of college. So right after graduating, I knew I didn't want to go to graduate school. I was kind of done with school. So I went back to New York, but luckily one of my, I kept in touch with the school through the career services office. And one of my, one of the students that I graduated with did have a job right out of school, and they liked her, and they went to the school to ask if they had other people that were looking, and I was able to find a job that way. It wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I really wanted to get something in the not-for-profit industry, or something that sort of contributed positively to the world in general. But I also needed a job, and so I started with a job in the Virginia, Washington, D.C. area, which a lot of that is government contracting. And so this was a government contract job. It was actually a military contracting job. But what that afforded me was some experience with database application programming environment. And I kept my eye open for other opportunities. And one, I got lucky, and I saw a position for the Smithsonian that all the experience that I was getting at my current job just sort of fit right in. So I do consider myself very lucky, but I was able to apply for that and get that. And I have been with the Smithsonian pretty much in the same position that I started for about 23 years. So I sort of found what I was looking for and was pretty happy with it, and stayed put. So that's sort of my career trajectory.
All right, thanks, Beth. Brad, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Bradley Cox. I'm an '86 graduate of Bridgewater, degree in physics, and then also a dual major degree in computer science mathematics was what they called it back then. So graduated in '86. Decided engineering was where I really wanted to go. So I spent 1 year full-time in graduate school at the University of Virginia. And Then started working in Charlottesville while I finished up my degree, and within another year or so, I'd finished up my master's in electrical engineering. My first job was a couple years in an avionics engineering company in Charlottesville, but then I pretty quickly moved to Lynchburg, and with a position with what was known at the time as Babcock and Wilcox. They make nuclear components for both the U.S. government and commercial nuclear power plants. And I've basically been doing that now for 31 years. I've actually, as is somewhat common these days, the company split in half 2 years after I got there, and then the group I was with got split off again. And then I eventually came back to a different group. And so all I like to say is, although technically I might have changed jobs 2 or 3 times, I've always worked, every company I've worked for was at one point a part of Babcock and Wilcox, back when I joined them in 1990. And I guess that's pretty common these days. There's a lot of mergers and acquisitions and changing like that. Within there, I've spent most of my time doing started off doing software mainly for inspection systems. It was within the R&D division, doing developing new ways to inspect nuclear reactors and other industrial components. And then decided it was time for something new about 14 years ago, and I joined the instrumentation and control group. So right now I work with a group that develops systems to control and monitor commercial nuclear power plants, mostly in the U.S., but we're a worldwide company headquartered actually in Paris, France, and recently even had an opportunity to go over to spend a year working in Germany on an engineering project. Through my career, I've gotten spent a good bit of my time as a supervisor, and one of the things my manager had me do was a lot of our recruiting, a lot of our interviewing and hiring process. I've stepped back from that now ever since my opportunity to go to Germany put me back in a pure engineering role, and I decided I liked that a lot. So when I came back, I told them I just want to be an engineer like I started with, and they've allowed me to do that. So right now I'm kind of back just to doing engineering, but it's the part that I really went to school for and enjoy the most anyway. Oh,
Phil, you're muted. You're muted, Phil.
Oh, yes, I am. So Greg, you want to go next?
Sure, I can do that. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Gregory Gum. Graduated in '89, degree in physics. Really was on a computer science track, and through some different, probably questionable decisions at this point, I wound up in physics, but I've spent my entire career in computer science. Started out, I say questionable, not because I don't enjoy the physics, because I really do, but it's just not where I wound up ever working. Fascinated by what Brad had to say there, that went out and got the engineering side of things. I deviated into the computer science. Spent about 5 years doing programming and for a small local computer company. And during that time, got into networking and found out I really had a really strong interest in that, really enjoyed it. After about 5 years, I went to work for what is now Centera RMH. The hospital was Rockingham Memorial Hospital at the time. And I did about 13 years in healthcare. Healthcare IT is quite interesting, a lot of cutting edge technology, medical systems, networking systems, things like that. During that time, had the opportunity to become a supervisor, and started in kind of the area that we're talking about tonight with hiring people and understanding how you pick good candidates for a job. About 13 years ago now, I went to work for James Madison University as their data center manager. So I was running the data centers, the Windows team, the Linux team, and an operations staff. And then about 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to move up and become the director of technical services. So in addition to the folks I had previously, I picked up the networking group and the IT security group. As far as hiring goes, I've been on, hired numerous people over the years in various positions. And I've participated on panels that are hiring committees where it was not my direct report or in my line that I was hiring, but hiring for another area of the department. It's fairly common at JMU that they'll use a cross-functional team pull together to hire for a position. So I've worked on a number of those as well. But I've been in IT my whole career and have been fortunate to stay local in the area the whole time. So that's kind of the path I've trod.
All right, thanks, Greg. So we're going to break from a theme here, and we're going to have our last panelist introduce himself. Rob?
All right, good evening, everyone. My name's Rob Ham. I'm from the class of 2005, and I work for the Department of Wildlife Resources, and I'm a lieutenant over our accreditation shop out of our Office of Professional Standards for the Virginia Conservation Police. So really what my job entails, that right out of college, I actually started, I had a pre-med degree that, as you can see, I'm not a doctor by any stretch of the imagination. So I had a pre-med degree, but was encouraged to look in a law enforcement path and also a path of conservation law enforcement. I ended up applying, was hired and right out of college in 2005, spent a lot of time in the patrol section. Was promoted several years ago to supervisor. I was fortunate enough to actually stay in the Bridgewater area and still live in the Bridgewater area. So I was promoted to supervisor over Rockingham, Augusta, and Highland County. And then in about the last 18 months ago, I was promoted to lieutenant. I work directly for our chief of law enforcement. And I work, like I said, I work out of our Office of Professional Standards, which houses internal affairs. My main focus is accreditation, policy management, and risk management. So just trying to ensure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and that all of our officers have the best knowledge and are able to make good decisions in split seconds when time really matters. So that's a lot of what I do, intermixed with a lot of other things, other duties as assigned. As far as interviewing and hiring, I've sat on some interview panels. I have not been the official hiring manager. I've led some panels, but just much like what Mr. Gum said, in state agencies, they do a lot of cross-divisional interview panels. So you'll sit on for people who may or may not be your direct report. As far as our academy and our recruits that come in as new officers, our training lieutenant handles that. However, I've been a background investigator. We have a very extensive process. It's about a 6 or 8 month process to get hired on with us. So I have assisted in almost all those different aspects throughout my 16 years here.
All right, thanks. Rob, while you're there and warmed up, I might ask the first question to you, simply because you said that you served on hiring panels, maybe not for direct reports, but maybe a colleague that you might work with, or maybe someone that's totally outside of the area that you're working in, sort of like Greg was talking about here. So as you look at these application materials, maybe just give a little description of the kind of application materials that you see that are required for the job that you're hiring for, and then maybe just a little bit of insight on what you pay attention to. What are the things that sort of pique your interest, that might make a candidate stand out?
Absolutely. So for us, a lot of it's very pretty much already set up that you have to apply through the Virginia jobs website. So what we get is a printout from that. So that and typically a resume. You may have, a lot of times we don't even accept cover letters at that time. Now, if someone wants to come into the panel and bring a cover letter, we will look at it at that point. But as far as submitting it prior, letters of references we'll read. But to some degree, we take those with a grain of salt. They just kind of show us that maybe you've had some connections and that sort of thing. But especially for the law enforcement candidates, we're more interested in the folks that you didn't want us to talk to, or the people you didn't mention for us to talk to, that we'll follow up with in a background investigation. But really the resume and just making sure that you filled out the application completely. That's probably one of the biggest hangups, is not looking at the job application and answering the questions to meet the job application. That's some of the things that, matter of fact, gets a majority of people before we even get to see them screened out, because they use a computer system to screen out a lot of things. And if you don't put in there that you've done this, this, and this, and that was in the job requirements, then it will be screened out before we ever get a chance to view it.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to maybe jump over to Brad, simply because I know you sort of, you were in charge of some hiring panels, so you may have a little different perspective. How would you answer that question?
Yeah, well, certainly the most important thing is the resume. That's what we see first. Part of it depends what path you take to get to your resume to us. You know, whether this is good or not, or fair or not, an awful lot of the resumes that get the attention are through connections. It's connections you have. You know, when we have positions, I often will send an email to Phil, and I'll get a couple resumes in from different people, and I can kind of push those through a more direct path than if you go through our website, which is the way you're supposed to do it. Now, I'm going to tell you, also go out and fill out the website. One of the things that I guess has been around now for the past 5 or 10 years, it's certainly different than when I was looking for starting my career, is you know, right on when you apply on our website, you're going to have to fill out a questionnaire, and it's going to have, basically, it's just going to go down. It's our HR department puts the questions in. They just parrot back exactly what's in the job posting. And a little secret, sometimes these job postings get rather stale. We don't always go out and write new ones, and sometimes there's stuff on there that probably isn't you know, up to date. And on top of that, the people in HR don't really understand any of the things that we put on an engineering job description. So sometimes the questions can get a little mixed up. Sometimes, but they can be referring to obsolete things. Unfortunately, we found that sometimes those questions become, you know, automated gates. If you don't answer the right thing to the right questions, you get pushed out of the system, and you'll get a rejection letter before any human ever sees it. So, you know, that's just happened sometimes. I've pushed back to our HR and told them I don't want them rejecting it, because I don't think that that's always fair. There's been several times when we've had interns that we really liked. We knew them well. We told them to go apply for it through the, you know, the official posting that we put out there just for them, and they get rejected. And, you know, because we didn't quite get the right words, or the candidate didn't understand the question right. So the recommendation I would give there is, if you come to a question that you can't answer the way that you think needs to be answered to get through that first gate, ask around before you continue filling it out. Try to find out some more information on it. You know, there's one particular question was, did you have experience with test equipment like oscilloscopes, logic analyzers, signal generators, and I'm not sure what else was on the list. Well, logic analyzers are something from my generation. No one uses a logic analyzer anymore, and it should never have been on there. And we got more people kicked out of our hiring process because we had an obsolete piece of equipment listed on there. It's our fault, but still, my recommendation to you would be, when you see a question like that you can't answer positively, go do a little bit of research on it and get to the place that you can say you've had some familiarity with it. I mean, that's talk to a professor, figure out what it is so that you can answer correctly for those. I'm not telling you to lie or anything, but I'm just saying, we're not expecting people to be experts at any of this stuff. Sometimes just being able to say you have familiarity is good enough. So think real carefully before you start answering those questions, and get rejected right out the gate because of a unfortunate question like that. So, but I think that's the so getting through that question. Then the next thing on the resume itself is what I'm really looking for. I'm not expecting to see a whole lot of relevance to what we normally do, but I'm really just looking for, I look at what projects you've worked on. I'm looking for buzzwords. I'm looking for the stuff we use, AutoCAD, SolidWorks, LabVIEW, Arduino, Java, Python, Raspberry Pi. I'm just looking, or techniques, robotics, motion control programming, and we don't always take a lot of time to look at them, so we're really just looking for those buzzwords that stick out. So the more of those things you can get in there, the better. And then, that also gives us something if we do go into a phone interview, or at least 2 years ago, it would have been an in-person interview, then that gives us something to talk about.
Okay, thanks. I might pose this question just a little bit differently to the two other folks. And that is somewhat related, but as you look at materials, is there something that you look at and say, that's how a candidate stands out? Is it a finely crafted cover letter? Is it the fact that they submitted their application and then called and made some sort of contact with you saying, hey, did you get this? And, in many cases, I think the contact information is to HR, and they're not going to say anything more than just, yeah, I see your application is in the system. So some of the old rules of how we engaged in the process, how applicants engaged in the process may have changed. So there's different ways of getting candidates to stand out. Do you have anything to add from what Brad and Rob already said about resumes, cover letters, and that sort of thing? Beth, you want to start off?
Sure. I will say, so the Smithsonian is part of the federal government. So I unfortunately fall under a lot of that bureaucracy. As Brad and Rob said, a lot of times there is a system above this that is, you have to put your applications into USA, the USA Jobs thing. A lot of stuff, by the time it gets to me and to, we have this ranking system and all of that. For me, one of the things that I have seen over the years is that earlier on, it was a very formatted system. You couldn't put a resume in. You had to fill out, you had to take your resume and cut and paste things into this thing, and everything looked vanilla. There was no way to stand out. You can now submit a resume, you can submit a cover letter, you can do those things. So I will say, when I finally receive a package of applicants that has vetted through that other process, I do look at the cover letters. I do look at the resume. I look, silly stuff just as formatting and the way it's written, the way that, especially in a cover letter, to me, it's sort of, why is it you're applying for this position? What is of interest for you to get this job? So I do enjoy reading those if they're provided. I also like to look just sort of from the resume point of view is, as Brad said, of course the buzzwords are important. Do they have this this or that, experience. But I'm also looking for like, just hints at problem solving skills, at soft skills like communication, the way things are written, the way, and I do rely very heavily on, sort of the, when we do finally get to the interview stage, just sort of some instinctual kinds of things relating to the communication and the way that they present themselves, the way that they talk about their ability to work in a team, to problem solve, to critical thinking kind of things. Those kind of things are have been fairly important to me when I go through a candidate pool. So.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Greg?
Yeah, I think that was a real good overview that Beth gave. It really hit a lot of the high points. Unfortunately, I think the flip of that is easier to answer. It's probably easier to tank your resume and make it look bad than it is to make it stand out. So if you get resume, you see some very interesting things if you go through 100 resumes or so. But it's important to remember that the resume and the cover letter, and this, just for reference, the system that I work in, we do not have an automated scanning system. I'm hearing more about those, but luckily I get to see, everyone that comes in, no matter how many there are. But you do look for that whole picture, and what you've got to remember when you go to present yourself, or the resume and the cover letter, if you have the opportunity to present that, is the only representation that you have to get your foot in the door. You may have a reference, you may have come through word of mouth in that fashion, but in most cases, it is your single first best opportunity to sell yourself for this position. And if it doesn't go well, then you've already started with a mark against you. So it's real important that your entire package look good and well done, and you not make crazy mistakes. And I'll give you an example, a resume that says I'm a very detail-oriented person, and it's got 3 or 4 typos in it. There's a mismatch there, and it catches your eye, catches my eye. The other one that I get is, I'm at JMU. I'm so excited to apply for this job at UVA. You're like, wow, if you don't catch that, it just sets the wrong tone. And it's an easy mistake. It's an honest mistake. We all make mistakes, but it is your calling card. You can't be there to personally represent yourself unless you have this done right. So it's real important that be solid. Touching on the skills, I think, is important, kind of echoing what Brad said. I look for key things, specifically trying to answer what's in the job description, what's in the skill set, because we list both of those. And the people that craft a cover letter in a conversational way such that they answer those questions, that, if I'm looking for Linux experience, then they'd call that out in their cover letter. I've got X number of years in Linux, and just kind of reinforce those points. Those help build a case for looking further at a candidate.
So consistency among cover letter and resume is what I heard many of you say. And at least mentioning some of the buzzwords in both places that the ad is mentioning as you read it. I'm just curious, one of the other elements that always seems to go into this at some point, and maybe not at the beginning level, but letters of recommendation. So I would be curious, for those of you who see letters of recommendation with the package, and maybe you don't, if it's in an automated system, it may just be that you're asked for references, and so only references are given. Do any of you have any comments on letters of recommendation? So for example, does it help or hurt you to have the president of the college write you a letter of recommendation versus your professor that you had for 15 classes? Just curious.
If someone's just starting out, Phil, I think my answer to that would be the professor, honestly, unless there was a really close connection with the president that was demonstrated in that letter. Perhaps that person served in their office as an intern or an assistant or something like that. But I think if I'm trying to get to know somebody's background, their work ethic, I would look more to the professor who might have spent, 3 or 4 or 5 classes, especially if it's a majors professor, and those types of things. For me personally, I think that would carry more weight.
I'll agree with that too. We, of course, we look at reference checks and do that, but we always know that those are folks you want us to talk to. So we do take that somewhat with a grain of salt, but if they really don't know who you are, those are going to be questions. We're going to do it as a reference check and a letter of reference. We're going to follow up on that letter of reference if it's provided. And we're actually going to call and talk to them. So if we call the president of the college and they say very basic stuff, we see a lot of like state senators and things of that nature. And if the state senator is just a friend of a family member, it really doesn't hold a whole lot of weight. But now if you worked for the state senator during a summer or something of that nature, that makes a whole big world of difference on the weight that we'll give that reference letter.
Phil, there are jobs at JMU, mainly in the academic side, where letters of reference are required. In the administrative side, the technical side where I'm at, we don't require letters of reference because we have to do reference calls, and it's a specific 1-page, I don't know, 7 to 10 questions that we ask about work, punctuality and attendance and getting along with others and those types of things. So we have to do the reference checks even if we get letters of reference. So we don't do a whole lot with those. One kind of another piece of advice, if you're going to use someone as a reference, make sure you let them know that you're doing that. I mean, first you should ask their permission, because you really want to make sure that they will give you a good reference. And it does happen that I call somebody and I have actually had it happen to me where I'll get a call out of the blue where somebody I knew at a job used me as a reference and didn't ask about it. And unfortunately, the reference that I had was not favorable. So if you're going to use somebody as a reference, make sure you talk that out, get their permission, make sure they'll give you a good reference. And then if you are applying, especially if you haven't been applying for a while, let them know that that's coming so it doesn't catch them out of the blue and catch them off guard.
Yeah, I'll just add that we really don't look at references. That's not something, I mean, references from professors might be okay, but corporate employers, I'm not really allowed to give a reference. If one of my co-workers would apply for a job somewhere and put me down as a reference, it has to be a personal reference. If they call me at work, I got to say, I'll put you over to HR, but I'm not allowed to answer these questions. Now, if someone says, I want you to, puts down my personal phone number and someone calls me, it's only happened once, and I just, I'll say, I'll give you my personal opinion. This isn't a company opinion, and I can't get into how long they worked or why they left, but I'll say he was a good person to work with. I'll answer some personal questions, but we don't really use them. That's not a big deal. Our form probably asks for them, and our HR department will definitely check to make sure you have the degree you say you have and you worked at the places you said you worked, but it's not part of the hiring decision. By the time those get called, the decision's already been made.
I recognize that we've gone on here probably for 30 minutes or so. Students, or anyone for that matter, if you do have questions as we go along, I'll just keep asking questions. I'm happy to have a conversation with our panelists, but if you have questions as we go along, please type them over in the chat and we'll get them asked. I'll say that before I ask, or before I mention one other thing. And this just may be for my own selfish reasons, because I hear that many of you do not consider letters of recommendation or letters of reference, whatever it might be called, not because you wouldn't consider them, just because you don't get them. But as someone who is asked to be a reference or to write letters of recommendation, it is absolutely yes. It's very nice to be asked, and typically folks are honored by that. But it is really, really nice, and I would say courteous, if you close the loop with that person who just spent an awful lot of time writing a letter for you for whatever job or whatever graduate school. It's really nice if you close the loop with them and say, hey, I got this job. Hey, I got into this graduate school. Just let them know how things turned out so that maybe I don't feel like I just spent all this time and I have no idea if it was worth it. I have no idea if I actually helped. So that's just me. And maybe that's just not the way that we do it anymore, but it is nice, maybe just to satisfy my own curiosity to know if I was actually helpful. I'm going to jump in with, yes. That is the case too, Dr. O'Neill. I will second that. Even if you don't write a letter, but you have something invested in your students or in the person that you're referencing, it is nice to know what the outcome is. Whether it's good or bad, it's just nice to know. So yes. I'm going to ask another question for our panelists. We'll just keep going unless people have questions. Just sort of walk through how the interview process goes, what someone can expect when they reach that level of getting an interview. I've done this enough that I realize that it is one of those things where there are certain expectations, and I think sometimes candidates come here, interviewing here, and they don't understand what those expectations are. So I'd be interested to hear from your perspective how the interview process works, and maybe something that you would say would be an expectation of yours. How a candidate dresses, if they're, I don't know if they're organized, just something about the interview process that you could describe for folks who might be going through that. Maybe I'll go back to Rob, since it's been a while since we've heard from Rob. So interview process.
Interview process for us, there's a lot of steps in our process, but timeliness, being prepared for the interview. If you're a minute late, you won't walk into the interview. You're typically greeted by someone, and depending where it's happening, if you're a minute late, it really doesn't matter what the excuse is, that you won't walk in more than likely. Especially for our new hires. Promotions may be a little bit different call depending, but one of the things is you're going to have a panel interview, and we're not allowed to ask any follow-up questions. Even if I know you very well, you have to tell me everything about yourself in those questions. And you have to look at the questions. They may be multiple part questions, and we're looking for you to answer every single part of it and not miss anything, not leave anything out. So you've got to really tie that in. And for us, really looking at that notification of vacancy, or what we call an NOV, is very important, because a lot of what we're going to ask is in that notification. So they were talking earlier, I think Brad was talking about mentioning things like Raspberry Pi and things we can talk about, but we're going to be looking for specific things as well. So if there's something in there, we want to hear that come out in those questions. So it's very, very important that you just time management. You know, a lot of times we will set a timer. It may be a 60-minute interview, and at 60 minutes, the interview is over. So that also is very important to us, that when it's over, it's over. If you only answered 5 of the questions, we're not going to extend it any longer. But I think one of the key things that everybody says is very different from our interviews. We do not give any feedback. The only feedback you get is if we're writing or if we're not writing. If we stop writing, then some of the information, we've probably stopped getting any information that we need out of the question. But the way that our structure is set up, we're not allowed to give you any feedback, any follow-up questions. We'll just say thank you and ask if you're ready to move to the next question. So it's very intimidating, and our promotional processes are very much the same way. And as a matter of fact, I just got off a promotional process, and I knew all the folks that came in for it. And if they didn't tell me something, I knew things they had done, and I couldn't bring that into my selection ability because they didn't bring it up in the interview process. So it's very strenuous as far as that concerned. But again, making sure that you're dressed appropriately, showing up for an interview with us and actually not having a tie on for gentlemen is that's probably a no-go. That could actually set you back a ways. So just being very professional and timeliness is probably some of the things on interview day that cause the people the most. And we understand, the other thing I wanted to say is we understand that you're going to be nervous. Don't worry about that part. We're nervous every time we have to go sit on a promotional panel. As a matter of fact, I'd sat on a promotional panel, like I said, just a couple weeks ago. And if I was talking with the other panelists, if the roles were reversed in 30 seconds and I had to go sit there and start talking about myself, at that point, I'm going to be nervous as well. So we understand that. Don't let that get you choked. We've all sat there before. So just continue feeding us information and get as much out as you can to let us know why you are the best applicant for the job.
Beth, let me jump over to you. Do you have anything about the interview process?
Surprisingly, just showing up. I've had cases where, an interview is scheduled and the person doesn't even show up. So yeah, it's just, timeliness, obviously. Our system is once you're in the process of interviewing, we have a much more relaxed kind of thing. Sometimes it's a panel. We go ahead and have everybody sort of in it. It's sort of like a meeting kind of environment. We try to. It's a little more casual. Dress isn't so important to me, other than a tidiness, showing that you do care about. Oh, I'm getting some feedback. Because in our environment in the IT office and stuff, we don't necessarily dress up. So, I'm not necessarily looking for, a 3-piece suit or, the comparable for women, but just that you put forth an effort at least. And then, in the way that you communicate, probably, yeah, I don't know. For me, it's more, it's sort of like just a lot of it is a feeling of how they're communicating about themselves and about their experience and, or even their lack of experience. If we are looking at an entry-level position, I'm looking at sort of those, somebody's not going to walk in and say, I have a number amounts of experience. They're going to, an entry-level position is going to be something where you're looking for somebody who's capable of learning and that is interested in learning. And so a lot of times for me, it's what questions do they have of me about the position, about what they would be doing, about, and if you can come with some semblance that you understand the position that you're applying for and that you've done a little bit of research on, you know, for me, the Smithsonian, the Natural History Museum, you know, and things like that. I think that that can go a long way towards, you know, sort of standing out in an interview.
I'm gonna paraphrase maybe, and tell me if I'm too far off base. I mean, I think part of the hiring process is what you're trying to do is you're trying to match both professional and sort of human interests in your candidates to the work environment that you're in. And so, I mean, when you hire someone, you don't want to set them up to fail. So if you realize that, you know, we can bring someone in, but they're going to need an awful lot of mentoring, and we're willing to do that. We're excited about doing that. Then I think that that's one way you look at a candidate and look at that experience. But if you bring them in and you say, look, we just don't have time, or we're not in a position to do a lot of mentoring, then this person needs to come in and they need to sort of fit the environment that you're in. Let me just ask you a question, since you mentioned dress. You said that, you know, dress may not be a big deal for you in deciding this, but you want them to look tidy. Could a candidate for a position with you all, could a candidate shoot themselves in the foot by overdressing? Let's say they show up, let's say a man shows up in a three-piece suit.
Well, let me,
Very neat and tidy, but would that sort of, I don't want to say shoot them in the foot, but would that make you look at them a little differently?
I would answer that no. I mean, we're engineers. We've with maybe maybe early on we were expected to wear ties occasionally, but right now we're a very casual workplace. The recommendation I would give, you know, when I was interviewing for my first jobs, it was easy. You bought an interview suit, you dressed up. That was the only answer. It's certainly not the only answer now. We don't expect someone to be dressed better than we are. Most of the time they are, but we don't expect that. What Beth said, tidiness is the most important thing. I'd rather see someone tidy than, I mean, sometimes we get a chuckle out of people who clearly have not learned how to tie a tie yet, still trying to wear a tie. If you don't know how to tie a tie, just don't wear a tie. It's that easy. The other real quick advice I would give is, don't be afraid to ask when you're setting up the interview, you're setting up the time. Say, what is your dress code there? Should I be in a tie or are you business casual? And if it's an engineering place, they'll say business casual and they'll say no tie. I usually try to go out of my way when I was setting up interviews to tell that to the person, but a lot of people don't know to do that. So ask. You know, that's always the best way to do it. When you're setting up the interview, ask what the office dress code is so that you can be addressed appropriately. And
I think that is a fantastic point, because that happens here as well. When we do talk to applicants about an interview, in many cases, they do ask good questions. They ask about, what should I expect? How do I get there? You know, these sorts of things. What is dress? So I guess my advice would be, if you have any question about any of those things, I think it's fair to ask at the point where someone has contacted you about an interview. I see we have a couple questions here, and I want to get to that. There was one question here about what is the most common way to spread knowledge about the job position? Okay, so that comes from Josh. Josh, are you referring to how the advertisement goes out, or are you saying about the knowledge itself? How would you find out about what the position entails beyond the advertisement?
I was referring more to the advertisement of the job itself. So how would they publicize the position?
Sure. So there's certainly a lot of electronic outlets out there, online outlets. I think I know the answer to Rob and maybe Greg's question, but well, okay, Rob, where do you advertise your job positions?
Of course, it is on Virginia Jobs, our website, our department website. We recently just did our biggest recruiting campaign that we've ever done. We had billboards throughout the state, lots of social media, Facebook Live, those sort of things. So we've changed the way we're recruiting for our officer positions. We typically don't hire from the outside for any of our other positions unless you get up lieutenant or above. Those when you can start competing from other agencies, but you have to have significant experience. That's not an entry-level position. You're going to have worked in law enforcement somewhere else. So for us, it really is. It's a lot of social media, the Virginia Jobs, and then here recently, a lot of radio, TV advertisements, and billboards.
Okay. Greg, how does JMU advertise?
I think there's probably a couple of different ways depending on the area you're in. If you're recruiting for faculty and such, I suspect it's different than the way we handle it on our side. But for the technical jobs, we tend to post, I like to post in the local paper, simply because if I can recruit somebody here, especially if they have roots, then they're more likely to stay and they're more likely to be accustomed to living in the Valley. We also tend to hit a couple of the major larger areas. So they're either the Northern Virginia area or the Richmond area when we recruit. But whatever we do, we always pick one of those that includes web posting, which is in some web format. Most often it's picked up by Indeed. And it seems like a lot of our jobs wind up on there either because they scrape them from our website or because we've advertised in a newspaper that's got a relationship with them as part of that package.
Beth, how about federal government jobs?
Federal government jobs. So the Smithsonian has both trust positions and federal positions. So the federal positions are on usajobs.com or gov.gov. For fellowships and internships and things like that, the Smithsonian has an office of fellowships and internships, I think. So we have those on our websites. I can send that information to Sherry. I think I have in the past, but so that gets done like that. If it's a we sometimes use recruiting firms when it's sort of a higher up position, but I mean, this was a long time ago, but I actually wound up getting my job through it was an ad in the Washington Post for the Smithsonian job. So it's kind of interesting. But that was a while ago. So I don't know how much they're doing that anymore.
You can just, so that's fine. I'll get it.
Well, he's out. I'll just say as a commercial company, as far as I know, our ads get posted on our company website and then they end up on Indeed. I'm not sure if, I assume that that's some automatic process. And it's not just Indeed, it ends up on all the different listing services, whether it's LinkedIn or Glassdoors or all those sort of things, they just kind of show up. But if you're interested in a particular area or a particular field, go out and look at the company's website. That's always the best way to do it. And just also recognize that a lot of the postings that you see posted out there, I mean, like most companies, I know ours has a requirement that you post a job. A lot of times we already have someone picked out, the job gets posted out there. Don't put too much weight in any one posting, because a lot of times a lot of postings either already have candidates picked out or they end up never hiring anyone. So you just have to get a lot of them out there. And it's always best to try to get that personal connection. Go out to LinkedIn and find a Bridgewater graduate that's working for a particular company. Especially if you already had the interview, go out and find someone and message them and just try to get anything you can to get that inside connection there. Would certainly work in a commercial environment. I mean, hearing what Rob said, that probably would have no bearing on a very regimented process like that. But commercially, it's still connections count, and whether that's fair or not, that's the way it is. And let me just say, one other advice that I sometimes give for the interview itself is, we see a lot of young people that are very nervous. And advice that I've given and I think is very helpful is, before the interview, spend a lot of time, sit down and come up with the stories that you want to say about yourself. Come up with 2 or 3 stories. The buzzword now in a lot of interviews that our HR department tells us we're supposed to do is to do a behavioral interview, where we ask you these awful questions. I ignore them. I've been around long enough. I don't have to listen to HR. But I basic, their behavioral interviews, or tell me about a time that you had a difficulty with a team member who wasn't pulling his weight on a project. And I don't like those. I do more technical interviewing, but the advice I would have is whether, no matter what type of interview it is, beforehand, you just sit down and decide what are 2 or 3 or 4 stories that you think explain a lot about yourself. And then whatever the question is, find a way to make one of those stories fit. It's amazing. If you come up with 2 or 3 stories, you'll always be able to, well, that reminds me of the time this happened. And, I'm not saying don't answer the question directly, but if you have those stories, you rehearse them, write them down, and make sure you can answer the story in 2 or 3 minutes, or you can explain the story and explain what you learned from it, kind of package it into a, here's what happened and here's what I did and here's what I learned from it. And I think you'll, it's amazing how you can take those stories and push them into answers for any question that gets asked.
So I see one more question here in the chat. This might be somewhat related to that, and that is, has there been any time where a job applicant has done a specific thing that stood out amongst all the other applicants? In other words, how do you stand out when you're competing? And then it's also phrased as, is it a good idea to do something over the top to show why you should get the specific job? Not sure about over the top. I think there's some things you could do that might be a little over the top that might actually shoot yourself in the foot. But is there anything? It's certainly not going to be strange behavior. But anything, I don't know, or maybe something that you shouldn't do, absolutely shouldn't do. Any comment on that question?
I think for me, can you relate to the person? Can sort of that same thing, do they have a story to tell that you can see growth, you can see that they can contribute? How can you get yourself position yourself so that you can show how you can make a contribution? I'm a little different from Brad's comments because my questionnaires for the technical folks are about 50% technical and about 50% of those behavioral questions. And we actually do rely fairly heavily on those answers. And the thing I like about that is it gives more of a whole picture of the person. So I can get an engineer who hopefully they can answer all the technical questions. But we also need to know that they can interrelate with people and work on teams and not create problems that we wouldn't spend a lot of time in HR with. So we rely on both of those. So I would say be comfortable with both types of the question. If you're in a technical field, know your stuff, present it well, be able to talk the technical language, but also be able to understand those human side questions as well, and interrelation questions, because you will get those on a lot of interview panels. I think I wanted to throw this out here. It's a little bit of a step back too, as you've heard us mention a lot about panels. And I know when I first started out, the idea of an interview was kind of a one-on-one thing. And I've seen a lot of people really freak out when they walk into a room and 6 other people walk in to interview them. We're not nearly as rigid as Rob's is. I got nervous just listening to his description of what they were going through. But I have seen people almost, to be honest, just almost have a meltdown, a nervous, just completely fall apart because there were 6 people. So do ask that question if it's something you're concerned about. But the question about being over the top, I don't recommend any theatrics or anything crazy to try to get yourself remembered in the interview, because you will be remembered, but it probably won't be in a positive light. So just be careful with that theme.
I'll throw out there one thing that may not, it's not over the top or get you remembered, but the biggest thing in a law enforcement type job is honesty. If anything comes out in the interview process that is contrary to your application, we actually can't hire you at that point. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case that now no longer will your testimony be good in court anymore. So even in one of our officers, if they lie under oath or are caught in falsifying any kind of documentation or anything of that nature. So your answers need to be very consistent, and we're law enforcement, so we're always investigating and looking into. So we're picking on every word. So if your application says that you wrote a paragraph about growing up and fishing all the time and all that, but then you come in and you really can't, we ask a question about fishing and you don't answer it correctly, that you seem like you have zero knowledge of fishing, it's not going to be good. So for us, it's honesty. That's what we're looking for. We would rather hear "I don't know," or in the interview or in the application of "I don't have experience with hunting." That's fine. That's not going to keep you from getting the job. But don't make up something to try to make it. Matter of fact, one of the things we hear a lot of times is "I just started doing it," and that's actually great. So for us, it's honesty. That will actually not get you the job. But I also recommend not anything over the top. If you come in and try to bring a bunch of balloons in that says "hire me" or something, you will be remembered, but not in a favorable way.
Don't pad your resume. That's the other thing that goes along with that. I had a very notable instance of a person who I was incredibly excited about. Looking at the resume, it hit all the right tones. It had the right buzzwords. Had a great experience, showed growth through several jobs. They came in for an interview, and it was a technical interview, and they were supposedly an administrator with 7, 8, 9 years of experience. And they simply couldn't answer any of the technical questions. I mean, none of them. And we almost didn't know how to handle it, because it was painfully obvious that something wasn't right. There was a complete disjoint between what they put on paper and what they were actually, being able to answer. And these aren't doctorate level computer science questions. These are basic Windows operating system or Linux operating system questions that anybody with, a year of experience should know the answer to. And so don't pad your resume. Be honest. "I don't know" is an acceptable answer. Or I have seen it, but I have, I only worked with it for a few months. So that's an acceptable answer. Much better than being called out for just, having something on the resume that's wrong or false.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like to do in an interview is to find a topic that the person interviewing doesn't know anything about. I'll try to pick out something that we use, like a quadrature encoder, or I could come up with, and keep on asking until I find something they don't know about, and then try to enter a conversation and see if see if we can converse about it. See if it seems like they're catching on, because ultimately I'm not expecting anyone I hire to know exactly what we do. We're going to have to mentor them and teach them. So I just wanted to know that it's someone who we can talk and they can figure it out. They know that, ask the right questions, and it's an easy conversation. So I quite often will look around until I find something that they don't know about, so that we can then have a conversation about it and see if they can catch on to it. So just don't be afraid to say you don't know, because that's kind of what I'm looking for sometimes, so we can go down that path.
So there's a couple of things here that I'll mention for the group, just that are in the chat, and I just thought maybe it would be good for the group to hear. I think it is the case that telling stories, talking about your experience is very, very easy if it's framed around something that you've already done. So internships, independent research projects, summer research projects, summer job internship sorts of things. Those are the kinds of things that you can really use to your advantage and talk about the things that you've done. So, and also it's great ways to make connections. So while they're great experiences, I think that is something that certainly if I were looking at a resume, I would love to be able to see something like that. So I would make that very obvious. So Bryce was asking about something that you make, something to get yourself to stand out. I think that those are the kinds of things that any of us would look at and say, yeah, that's something noteworthy that we can pay attention to. And it's also a good conversation piece for the interview as well. One question down here, this is from Colton. Would you consider bringing resume copies for those on the interview panel? So how prepared with the information that you've already submitted do you need to bring to the interview? Just should you, shouldn't you, that kind of thing. And then the second piece is, what do you think about interviewing candidates and then whether or not you hear from them again with a thank you or just some just kind of polite, courteous sort of acknowledgement of the time that you spent together. So anybody want to field that question? Beth, do you want to?
Yeah, I was gonna say, one of the things that does stand out for me is if somebody one asks if it's okay that they contact you after the interview. And then, like if you've passed out business cards or provided information, but to get a, I mean, not so much letters anymore, but to get an email, that says, thank you for your time. And I really appreciated talking to you. Just that a little bit of that follow-up. For me personally, I find that to be sort of a plus, on the plus column. So, I do appreciate that. You had asked earlier about social media and whether or not, like, if somebody has, I can personally say I've never looked somebody up. I don't go on LinkedIn and kind of check up on people. So I don't really now, I'm not in human resources, so I don't know if human resources does that kind of thing. So, that doesn't play a big part in sort of my process in evaluating candidates. So
I would be curious just because it's the way it's billed, and I know we're really pressing time here, but does anybody have any comment specifically about LinkedIn? Good idea or no comment?
I would say it's a good idea to have a good presence there. there's probably not going to be, for someone just out of school, there's not going to be a lot new to learn. If I'm interviewing an experienced person, I will definitely go out and see if we have any common people, or I'll learn a little more about the candidate there. And it is nice to, when you're starting out, there's not much there to differentiate yourself. So having a good, professional quality photo out there is not going to hurt. I know, I don't know if that's something that the college makes available, a method of their, bringing in someone a little more talented at creating good photos that will come up and give you some digital copies you can use of a professional photo. I don't think it hurts. It's certainly another aspect that you can make an impression on.
Hey, Sherry, I'm going to throw that to you. Do you want to do some commercial for career services?
Would I ever? I mean, because you see me, looking like the bobblehead dog here. Yes.
Oh, it's your chance here.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And I want to say too to all our panelists, thank you all so much for joining us. And everything you're saying is just so dead on. And the good news is that's what we help students with in career services, helping them develop their stories, making sure we have resumes that can pass the ATS systems that are getting more and more prevalent. Those are the computer systems that they have to get through, before they even see a human eye. And then also the things that do build the connections, because I think you're right. So much, even though we deal in such an electronic world, it still boils down to connectivity. And in fact, internships are becoming more and more of a way of onboarding. So so that personal touch is still very, very important. And in terms of LinkedIn, the gurus do the LinkedIn photos. And we actually have a few sessions coming up where students that are interested in getting a professional photo done for LinkedIn can do that. Career services, we also look at your resume, look at cover letters, recommend the thank you letters, definitely the thank you, the follow-up, very, very important. Helping with interview, helping with creating your story and figuring out, like I think a couple of you also said that it's not just about your technical skills, it's also about what we call the competencies, which are communication skills and leadership skills and critical thinking and teamwork. And where did you develop those skills? Can you tell those interesting stories? And like I put in the chat there too, we love stories. Those stories are what cement you in our minds. So, and it also looks too like you've really thought about your what you could be for this organization. What do you have to contribute? So when your resume and your cover letter, your interview, they're thoughtful, they're well planned, you're just going to go leaps and bounds over your competition. And so career services can help you with that.
Okay. Thanks, Sherry. Hey, we are really pressing our hour here. In fact, not even in physics and time dilation can we sort of get that 20 minutes back. But anyway, so maybe you physicists appreciated that joke. But anyway, so thank you so much for joining us, everyone. There's really some good information over in the chat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that Sherry, you get that information. You probably already have it. You might be writing it down, but I'm going to make sure that you have it. I will have it as well. If anyone here, any student here is looking for that information, please contact either one of us, and we'll get that information to you. I don't see any more questions. I think we've got them all answered. I just want to say thank you very much to our panelists. I don't know, I would ask if you have any parting words, a minute or two, if you have any parting words, but certainly students, I know you're probably ready to move on. Feel free to click out whenever you want to, but we'll end here in a couple minutes after the panelists give any last minute advice. Anybody?
Say networking, connections, practice, take advantage of your career services. I'm sure they would probably, I would assume one of the things they would probably let you do is do a mock interview with you. Yeah, I know personally my second and third interview were much better than my first. So let's, try to make that first interview one that doesn't count, and make the one that counts your second or third interview. Ask someone at your home, or ask that has a similar position. Could you just do a fake or a mock interview for me, and just like you would interview a candidate, just to give me practice. I think that's an excellent advice.
For
Thank
me,
you.
it's,
Go ahead, Beth.
sorry, Rob. Also, just be comfortable in being yourself. Not everybody is perfect at every aspect of what an interview entails, and be okay with some of the failings that you may have or whatever. I mean, just try to be yourself in an interview, I think is be comfortable in your own skin in the interview, especially if you're trying to put forth, sort of a facade of something. A lot of times that can hurt a lot. So I think just go walking in and being who you are is my best advice.
One other thing I'd throw out there as well is one on interviews. Of course, we are a division of law enforcement, so ours is a little more rigorous and more regimented, but also we do have the Department of Wildlife Resources, which has a fisheries division, a wildlife division, all other types of jobs. So they do vary a little bit in how those processes work. Some of the state standards are still the same. So a lot of what my experience is in the law enforcement division of it. But my most important thing for anyone is make sure you look into a job that you truly enjoy. If you're not enjoying it, it's not worth it. I don't care how much it pays or any of that. Money eventually will wear out, and it is not worth it anymore. So find a job that you enjoy, and the time will fly by very quickly, because it doesn't seem like it was all that long ago that I was interviewing for this job. So it's flying by very quickly.
Yeah, be honest and be genuine, be yourself, and be personable in the interview. We have a saying that we can teach skills, but we can't teach personality. So you really want to kind of build that rapport with the folks you're interviewing as much as you can, and get your foot in the door. So good luck.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm going to dismiss us, I guess, and I can end the meeting, but I would like to talk with our panelists here at the end before you all click off. So I'll ask everyone else, they can leave. Yeah.